Good morning. As promised, today we are going to walk step by step through your World History 1 final exam project. The project is being assigned today, Monday, May 24th, and will be due in full Friday, June 4th by midnight. Absolutely no exceptions. Remember, we've gone over the calendar many times. The reason for this is because grades will be closing June 9th. And if we receive projects any later than Friday the 4th, we will not be able to grade them and get them back to you in time for grades to close. So please be mindful of that and continue to keep on track with your daily assignments leading into the completed project. So, what is your final project? Let's begin there. As we briefly reviewed on Friday, your mission is to create a theme park centered on each of the 4 world history time periods covered throughout our course. Important. Your park must represent all 4 time periods. You are not picking one unit and making your entire park centered around that unit. Rather, your park should represent our full course with 2 rides, 1 vendor, and 1 character, 4 required elements, each from one of the 4 units. Your final project, which will be a park brochure and map in Google Slides, will provide an overview of your park for anyone interested in visiting. Your goal is to inspire those who may not love history and bring joy to the lives of those who do. Be inspired, be creative, be historical. All the time that you're working on your project, keep 2 things in mind. 1, your goal with the park brochure is to attract customers, make people want to come to your park and experience your rides. You're competing with the big guns like Disney World opening back up and Six Flags opening back up. How are you going to get people to come to your park and spend their money there instead? And always, as much as we want this final exam to be fun and creative for you, remember its ultimate purpose. It's taking the place of a traditional final exam. We do need you to show what you learned from each of the 4 units. So the first thing you're going to do is create a catchy name for your park that lets people know what it's about. The name should grab the attention of passersby while representing what your park is trying to do. Let's pause for a moment and look over at the park brochure template that you're going to receive after completing this introductory ed puzzle. I have put together for you an outline of a park brochure that you will edit the placeholders, add pictures to, and make it your own. The very first slide says the name of your historical theme park and then says type the name of the park here. As we've been discussing for each one of our unit projects, you would delete the text here and type in your park's name. Make sure you don't leave the placeholder text in. That looks very messy and it will lose you some points on the rubrics. Here's my example. You'll see that my park, not terribly creative, has been named Historyland, but it at least does check the box, right, of a catchy name that lets people know what my park's about. You'll notice that I've also taken the basic theme park or amusement park background and added plenty of images to really try to draw people in. My cover page of my brochure clearly tells people what my park is about and what kinds of things they might expect to see on their visit. All of these materials are available to you under the topic 52421 that says daily grade for your final project, which is of course due June 4th. We will keep reminding you of that because there really are no exceptions to that hard deadline. The 2 key reminders in there tell you that your park has to represent all 4 time periods and must include all 4 required theme park elements. 4 and 4. It's meant to be easy, meant to line up nicely. We'll go back to the instructions in just a moment. They are attached here for you, so that's where you'll find your copy to go through on your own and refer back to. But I recommend using this information as something of a checklist. You have to use units 2, 3, 4, and 5, and you have to have 2 rides, a vendor, and a roaming character. So if you design your first ride and it comes from Unit 5, the Renaissance era, cross that out so that when you go to design your second ride, you know Unit 5 is no longer an option. You need to come up with something that represents Unit 2, 3, or 4, and so on. So let's take a closer look at what's required for each of your 2 rides or park attractions. Your park must have at least 2 rides or attractions, each representing a different unit of study. These rides need to have 2 parts, a name and a 2-paragraph description. The first paragraph, you'll describe in detail what the attraction is. Is it a roller coaster, a log flume, a tilt-a-whirl? What kind of ride is it? What can people expect? Why would they want to come and experience this attraction? Paragraph number 2 tells us the historical significance surrounding the ride. Think of it as an info sheet for a customer or investor for each of your rides and attractions. Taking this back to your final project template, the next slide in the template says name of ride number 1. So once again, make sure that you actually replace this with text. An example ride that I have for you was Commodus's Coliseum. So I would write Commodus's Coliseum. And then I would explain what Commodus's Coliseum is. Maybe it's a roller coaster. So for example, and we'll go back to this list in a moment, I've explained that it's a roller coaster. So I might type that it's a roller coaster here, but then I'm going to put my brief description into the template down here when it says, what will this ride be like? Now, notice this is only 1 sentence. I have to now expand on this little blurb that I've written and make sure that I give as much detail as possible to make people really want to visit the park. So I can start with, it's a roller coaster, and the fast turns and agile spins of this coaster emulate the dexterous skill of gladiators fighting lions, tigers, and other men to the death in the Roman arenas. Then I need to expand on that to tell people, again, why they need to go on this roller coaster in particular instead of the ones at Six Flags, which would be our competitor, right? So that's only 1 sentence. I need at least 4 more sentences here for this to meet the requirement of 1 paragraph minimum. Moving on to the 3rd slide in my theme park brochure template. I once again have changed the text that said name of ride number 1 to the actual name of my ride, Commodus's Coliseum. This is where I'm going to write my paragraph explaining the historical significance. Think about this as though this is the information that folks read when they're waiting in those long lines. There are posters, colorful, with images around, explaining the historical background and theme of the ride. That's what you're doing here with this paragraph. You want to make sure you tell us what time period this ride represents, and then make sure that you're demonstrating your understanding of the key concepts from units 2, 3, 4, and 5. So if you had chosen to do Commodus's Coliseum, that's from unit 2, you're going to make sure that in your description of your ride, you tie it back into the specific factors that contribute to an empire's rise and fall. A roller coaster kind of is a great ride for something like that, right? Certainly, maybe you're not going to focus, even though the ride is titled Commodus' Coliseum, and that has to do with the gladiatorial arena. Maybe you're not going to focus squarely on the gladiatorial games here, and you're going to think about Emperor Commodus, and you're going to talk about the qualities of good and bad leadership. How good leadership helps empires rise. Maybe that's the rise in the roller coaster track. And then bad leadership, such as Commodus, tends to contribute to an empire's demise. So again, it is very, very important here that your ride's historical significance and background is historically accurate, convinces the public this period of history is important and worth knowing about, and ties directly to the key concepts that we reviewed last week from that particular unit. So that's 2 of our 4 required park elements. Let's talk about the other 2. Once you've created your 2 rides or attractions, you need to then come up with a food or crafts vendor. This might be a food truck or a food stand, or a stand selling souvenirs. Your park needs 1 food or a crafts vendor. Your vendor should represent a time period that has not yet been represented by one of your rides or by the roaming character. You will pick your vendor, you'll give it a name. Remember, even vendors and food stands and souvenir stands in a park tend to be part of the overall theme. You still want to attract people to visit it. And you will write a paragraph explaining what your vendor sells and the historical significance of these items. In the template, if we go down to one of the slide number 7, it says your food and crafts vendor. You can leave this as your food and crafts vendor, but again, I really recommend to you that over here on the banner above the little cart, you name your vendor. So for example, if your vendor is selling 14th century cures for bubonic plague, or perhaps flagellant whips, maybe both, you might name your vendor medieval apothecary. Something like that, something with a theme that just clearly shows us what time period it's coming from and makes people want to go over to this stand. Make sure that you describe in detail what your park vendor sells, so please don't just say 14th century cures for plague. Go back to the primary source we looked at in Unit 4, for example, and list out some of those cures. Tell us what you're actually able to purchase there. Remember, this is an advertisement. It's marketing material to attract people to want to come here. So you can't just say, what does your park vendor sell? Mansa Musa's gold. Who cares? Tell us about that. Tell us why it matters. You certainly can't just say salt or whips. All right, you can get stuff like that anywhere. Why do I have to pay the admission price to come to your park to get those items? Tell us the historical time period. You can be as specific as you want, but I do want you to write a full sentence here. Please do not just say 1300s. What I would much rather you do is say this vendor and the products that are sold here represent the medieval period. Maybe in parentheses I put 1300s. In Europe, or even maybe when Europe and Asia were being devastated by the deadly bubonic plague. That would be the appropriate response to that prompt. Just a sentence, but please do not just say 1300s. Okay? That is insufficient. That is not enough detail. It is not exciting anyone to come to your park. And then finally, why did you choose to offer these products? So you have one vendor, you chose this one product. Why is this the product you think people are going to want or should have? Or what story do these items or these food tell? So again, this is where I want you to be creative and remember that you're trying to attract people to buy these items and to come to your park, but also where you need to describe in detail the historical significance of these items or of the food. If you were doing a medieval apothecary and you were selling 14th century cures for bubonic plague, you would go into detail about what people understood and didn't understand about disease and how disease spread. You might bring up miasma theory. You might bring up how people didn't know what bacteria was, so they were blaming sins and sinners, so they were not bathing, and they were using all kinds of weird smells. Maybe that's something you're selling to ward off death, because they, in their mind, death was caused by bad smells. So you really need to make sure that you illuminate that for us, because that's really the bulk of your grade. Your creativity is awesome, will be rewarded, but you can't get an A or a B if you don't give the historical significance. So please, please, please don't forget about that. All right, now finally we have our roaming character. A roaming character is the costumed character that wanders about your park and guests take pictures with them. They kind of add to the theme. Children either love or hate them. Examples are characters like Mickey Mouse at Disney World or Bugs Bunny at Six Flags. Your park needs one roaming character. You can have multiple, though, if you would like. Perhaps you need almost more than one to create the scene. That's perfectly fine. Don't box yourself in too much. But all of these are minimums. So you must have at least one roaming character, and you should pick a historical figure from a time period that has not yet been represented by one of your rides or food and crafts vendor. So let's say that you have created both of your park rides. Maybe your first ride is from Unit 2, your second ride is from Unit 5, your vendor was from Unit 4, so now your roaming character has to be from Unit 3 in that example. You have 4 elements. Each one must represent a separate unit from our course. So pick a historical figure and then write a paragraph explaining their contribution to history and why you chose to have them roam about your park. Going back to our template again, you'll see that says your roaming character is. I recommend you add a text box and put their name over here. You see here that you have a placeholder for a character's face. I would really like you to put an image here. Then you're going to tell us who your roaming character will be, the time period they represent, and a detailed and specific explanation of why you chose this character. In other words, what is their historical significance? Let's look at an example. In my park, I chose Hannibal of Carthage from Unit 2. You'll notice that even in these short pieces, like when it says, what figure did you choose? I've written a full sentence. So what historical figure do you have roaming around your park? Hannibal Barca, legendary military general from the ancient Carthaginian Empire in Africa. That should tie people in, hook their interest. I've put Hannibal of Carthage in bold text right over the image, and then I've added his picture on top of the placeholder that we saw a moment ago. Which historical time period do they represent? Once again, a full sentence. Hannibal was a military general from Carthage in northern Africa during the classical period. Remember, if you forget about the time period, you can look this up. Just make sure you don't directly copy and paste from Wikipedia or whatever the very first article on Google is. First of all, I will know immediately because it will not be written the same way that the rest of your own writing is. And I want you to make it your own. I need you to show me that you understand, not that you know how to Google and copy and paste. You will lose points. I will not count anything that has been directly copied and pasted from the internet. It'll be as though you just didn't do this page, so keep that in mind. Now, I've given a detailed example that ties right back to the key points from Unit 2 about why I chose Hannibal. Remember, the key takeaways from Unit 2 were the specific factors that help empires expand in size and power, and the specific factors that tend to weaken an empire to the point of collapse. Hannibal, as we learned in Unit 2, is an example of one of the factors that helps empires expand: strong leadership. I chose Hannibal to roam around my historical theme park after realizing not many people know about Hannibal, and I wanted to bring greater awareness and appreciation to this legendary African. Although the Carthaginians were ultimately defeated by the Romans, Hannibal's military brilliance brought devastating defeat to Scipio's Roman legions in the Second Punic War. In fact, Hannibal was a far better leader than Scipio, and it's possible to argue Scipio's army only defeated Hannibal due to being better resourced in order to use Hannibal's own tactics against him with more soldiers and better weapons. Hannibal is a fantastic example of how strong leadership helps empires expand in size and power. Towards the end of your template, you will find the rubrics. The rubrics are also in the project directions if you want to use the Google Doc, but I've also embedded them right into your template so that you can refer back to them after you've completed each element of your park to make sure that you've done everything you need to get the full points. To get an A, to get full 25 points on ride number 1, for example, you need to explain in great detail what the ride will be like and what the name of the ride is. You need to explain the historical background of the ride's concept in great detail. And you want to check for spelling and grammar. Use the built-in tools. Make sure that you have clearly organized paragraphs with at least 5 sentences each. Once again, think back to when we were looking at Commodus's Colosseum and I had written just 1 sentence for my explanation of what the ride will be like. 1 sentence is not a paragraph. If I fill in 4 more and I have clearly explained what the ride will be like, I've gotten all of my points. If I leave it at that 1 sentence, I'm far down here, much further down here to like a 2 or a 1. I'm not getting all my points. Ride number 2 is the same, so let's go over to Food or Crafts Vendor to get your full 25 points here. Remember, it all adding up to 100. Students Vendor has relevance to the time period and a clear, logical explanation of why you're selling these items and what the connection is. And of course, again, you give at least a 4-sentence description of the Food or Crafts Vendor, and you have checked your writing for spelling and grammar mistakes. To get your full 25 points for your roaming character, you've explained in great detail who the character is. No one-word answers. You've explained why this character is important to the time period and why you chose this character in great detail, connecting it back to the themes and key points from that unit of study. And as always, you have checked for spelling and grammar mistakes because this is a marketing brochure. You want to put this forth to people, and you're not going to have people come into your park if they think you're careless and you've overlooked important details. You think someone's going to get on a roller coaster if they think you've made careless mistakes? I don't think so. So we've gone over the project instructions in detail, and you have, again, a quick summary of the absolute requirements right here in the resources material under today's date and heading. Let's now take a look at the other 2 attachments here. One gives you a list of different types of theme park attractions to help you come up with your 2 rides or attractions. And the other gives specific examples of each of the park elements related back to the units we studied. Let's start with types of theme park attractions. Now, it's really easy for us to come up with at least 1 or 2. We can probably all picture, for example, a roller coaster when we think of a theme park, an amusement park. We can probably all think of maybe a teacups ride and a Ferris wheel. But you might get stuck, especially when trying to come up with that second ride, right? So here's some ideas to help you think about what types of rides there are. Dark rides are types of things, dark ride, let's just read it through, are also known as haunted rides or spook houses, maybe a tunnel of love. It's an industry term for any amusement park or theme park ride that uses vehicles to send passengers into an indoor environment and through a series of scenes or tableaus. Ride vehicles take many forms, including cars on a track, trackless vehicles, and boats that float in channels of water. A flat ride refers to attractions that typically spin around and usually include a circular platform. Examples are Tilt-A-Whirls, Scrambler, Spinning Teacups, Dumbo the Flying Elephant style rides. Again, be thinking about what could you replace Dumbo the Elephant with to make it historical themed. A wave swinger, yo-yo, or swing ride, Roundup, Flying Bobs, or Gravitron. You can always Google these things if you need an image to kind of jog your memory. Rides that incorporate virtual reality are a more recent industry innovation. Initially, most VR rides were existing roller coasters that designers then outfitted with VR headsets for passengers to wear. Designers have added VR to other existing rides, including drop tower rides, spinning flat rides, and motion simulator rides. While they are not rides in specifically, walk-through attractions such as the Void at Disneyland and Disney World make far better use of VR, and these location-based virtual reality experiences immerse guests in interactive adventures, often with compelling stories and elements. This could give you a lot of leeway when trying to design one of your rides. That's why we say it can be a ride or an attraction, something for people to experience while at your park. Another example are motion simulator rides. These use seats that move in sync with point-of-view media projected onto a screen to provide viewers with the illusion they are moving and physically participating in the action. One of the earliest motion simulator rides is Star Tours at the Disney parks. It uses 40-passenger cabins that are mounted on motion bases. Other rides use different motion bases configurations. Individual seats might have their own motion controls. Sometimes rows or sections of seats move together. In Despicable Me Minion Mayhem at Universal Parks, for example, the theater is divided into sections of seats with each section having its own motion base. Most motion simulator rides are also 4D rides, requiring those 4D glasses. A subgenre is the roving motion-based simulator ride. Using a vehicle that is mounted on a motion base, it combines a dark ride with a motion simulator ride. As in a dark ride, the vehicles move through a series of scenes that include actual, practical set pieces, but the sets also include screens onto which action is projected and with which the vehicles move in tandem. The Amazing Adventures of Spider-Man at Universal Orlando's Islands of Adventure is an example of a dark ride with a roving motion-based vehicle. So now that we've talked through the different types of rides you might have, and of course, if you can think of others that you've experienced that are not on that list, please by all means use them. These ideas and examples are not prescriptive. You don't have to use these. They are all designed to help you if you are stuck, to help you. Maybe you hear something and it makes you think of something else. That's the goal. So I would much rather you see I would much rather see you do something totally original on your own than see my examples come up again and again when evaluating your projects. You can definitely use my examples. However, make sure you don't copy right from my teacher example, such as my description of Hannibal Barca or everything that I wrote about Commodus Coliseum. Need to see what you know. So the other attachment says ideas for rides, characters, and vendors, and it lists a bunch of historical figures that you could use as roaming characters, ideas for vendors that you could use in your park, and a few different rides to get you thinking about how to craft your rides to be historically significant and exciting all at the same time. For your historical figure, you could, as I did, use Hannibal Barca of Carthage, use one specific historical figure. You might do Mansa Musa, king of Mali, or Sunni Ali, king of Songhai, or you might do something slightly less specific. Maybe you do Europeans fleeing cities to escape the plague. They run through your park and they act with the park guests as though they're part of a movie scene trying to run away from the plague. And these Europeans try to convince your park visitors that they need to leave, they need to escape the plague. Maybe there's a heretic fleeing persecution from the Catholic Church, and you have not only that person running around, but you also have people from the Pope's office in Rome hunting them down and asking your park visitors questions about where the heretic is. That could be pretty exciting, so you might want to do that. Example vendors, we talked about having 14th century cures for plague or flagellant's whip. You could also have a make your own Gutenberg print stand where visitors and guests can use a Gutenberg printing press to make their own copy of something. You could sell books from Timbuktu, gladiator swords called the gladius, salt from sub-Saharan Africa, gold from the Kingdom of Mali. Once again, absolutely just be creative, right? And then we talked about a few of these different examples. We talked about Commodus's Coliseum as a roller coaster. Two other examples that I've given you to help get you thinking. You could do a haunted house called Heresy Hunters. This would fall into that category of dark rides and maybe even the dark ride motion simulator genre. I've called this ride Heresy Hunters. Coaster cars on a track send passengers through a frightening tunnel as they try to escape being burned at the stake for challenging the Catholic Church of the 1500s. Remember, if you did this one, you would go into detail about the kinds of things that park visitors would see while going through the tunnel of this ride. And then you would explain the historical significance of what was heresy and what was the role of the Catholic Church in the 1500s and why did people have to try and escape being burned at the stake? What was getting them at risk of this in the first place, right? And the last example I have here is a log flume, Sunni Ali's Conquest of Mali. Riders board replicas of Songhai naval ships and sail through high-energy water rapids under Sunni Ali's command on their way to capture Timbuktu on the Niger River. Once again, that's one sentence, so I would go into much more detail in my first paragraph, explaining exactly what my park visitors would experience when going through the different log flume twists and turns. And then I would give lots of detail about the Songhai Empire, maybe even connecting it back to Mali. If that would be a hard thing for you, don't pick this as your option. But maybe you, instead of doing Sunni Ali's Conquest of Mali, you do Mansa Musa's Hajj, his pilgrimage. That might be easier for you to do. Just find a way to incorporate it into a ride, and then make sure you explain its significance in great detail. All right, the last thing I want you to do today, before we give you this template to fill in on your own and begin working, is complete the Google form that I have linked here, telling us what you're currently thinking your park is going to look like. What are the 2 rides going to be? You can certainly change them after you submit, but we just want to get a sense of what your thinking is like. What are you thinking of doing for your food and crafts vendor? And what are you thinking of doing for your roaming character? So that's all. We just have a space to list those 4 things. If you need to think about it some more, simply save the link, bookmark the link to this Google form, and complete it later on today. But make sure you do that today so that we can release the template for you and you can begin working. We just want to make sure that you fully understand what it is we're asking of you and the requirement to only use each one of these units one time. We don't want you to go and do a whole bunch of work that you then have to do over. That's the whole point. It's what we're trying to avoid. Any questions you have will be part of tomorrow's attendance post, but certainly if you have any burning questions, make sure that you email me or submit them on your Google form so that I can get back to you right away. Because ideally, if you can get started right away, you will be done with this project long before its due date of June 4th.